Welcome to a land with over 2,000 years of Buddhist and Hindu history. Welcome to a land once occupied by the Dutch, Portuguese, and British, each having left their influence on this small island. Welcome to the land of the fire dance and an equally fiery cuisine. Welcome to Sri Lanka, the teardrop island. On this vacation, we will visit several destinations in Sri Lanka, beginning in Colombo, the capital and largest city, home to about 750,000 people. We will then travel by train to explore the ancient city of Polonnaruwa, the site of the 12th and 13th century capital city, and home to some of the best preserved archaeological sites in the country. We will then travel by tuk-tuk to the town of Dambulla and visit the Golden Temple. While in the Central Plains area, we will take day trips first to the town of Minneriya, and then for a day safari to the Minneriya National Park Wildlife Sanctuary. Before returning to Colombo, we will travel south to the city of Kandy to visit the famous Buddhist Temple of the Tooth. But before we get started, a little background information is always helpful. The island of Sri Lanka, formerly known as Ceylon under British rule, is located in the Indian Ocean, about 25 miles off the southeast coast of India. Sri Lanka is 430 miles long from north to south and about 140 miles wide with a population of 21.5 million. To give you an idea of the size, Sri Lanka would fit into the area of northern England. Throughout Sri Lanka, there is lots of historical evidence of its Buddhist and Hindu roots as well as European occupations. To truly appreciate this land and people requires an understanding of their history. The history of Sri Lanka began around 500 BC, when about 700 Sinhalese people from northern India, under the leadership of Prince Vijaya, arrived on the island and established the Anuradhapura kingdom. By 225 BC, Buddhism was introduced to the kingdom from India, around the same time that a group of Tamils of the Hindu faith from southern India invaded the island under the leadership of King Alada. The Sinhalese eventually defeated the invaders, but later, around 900 AD, another invasion by the Emperor Rajaraja, ruler of the Tamil Chola Empire of India, successfully conquered the Sinhalese, ending the Anuradhapura kingdom and moving the capital of Sri Lanka to Polonnaruwa. The period of European occupation began with the Portuguese in the early 1500s, who in turn were replaced by the Dutch in the early 1600s, and then by the British in the 1800s. During this period, the fortified city of Kandy remained independent until 1815 when the city was defeated and occupied by the British. The British renamed the country Ceylon and ruled until granting the island independence in 1948. The period from 1948 to the 1980s was one of social and economic tensions between the Sinhalese Buddhist and Tamil Hindu peoples. These tensions broke into armed conflict in 1983 between the Tamil Tigers and the ruling Sinhalese government, and continued until the defeat of the Tamil Tigers in 2009. With the ending of the armed conflict, Sri Lanka has become an increasingly popular tourist destination, with visitors' numbers increasing each year. This is Colombo, the capital city of Sri Lanka. To explore this busy city, you will need to be introduced to our principal form of transportation, the three-wheeler vehicle known as the tuk-tuk taxi. The tuk-tuk taxi comes in various colors, usually red, green, and beige. While there are regular taxis available for hire, as well as cars and drivers, for trips around the city and even between towns, the tuk-tuk is a less expensive and flexible alternative. It's a great way to see and hear everything going on around you. These smaller vehicles can dart in and out and around traffic and get you where you need to go. Our first stop is the Minneriya Buddhist Temple in the heart of Colombo, across the road from Beira Lake. This is the most famous Buddhist temple in Colombo, built about 120 years ago. From the statues in the entrance, you can see that it's been built in a mixture of Chinese, Thai, and Indian styles of architecture. Within the main temple building are examples of beautiful Buddhist statues and ceiling frescoes. Outside of the temple, there are several buildings, including a library, museum, and learning center. From the second story of the residential hall, we can look down at the stupa, or bell-shaped building in the courtyard, and see the temple elephant. This was my first time seeing an elephant up close, even one this young. It was apparent that this elephant had a very good relationship with his temple caregiver. When we left Canada, it was about 7 degrees, and when we arrived in Colombo, it was around 37 degrees. So on our first day, we went looking for a cooler spot to visit in the afternoon. There is no better place in Colombo than the city park to find some shade on a hot Sri Lankan afternoon. There's a huge Buddhist statue at the front gate that welcomes you to the park. Inside, the park is a cool and quiet oasis to escape the heat of the afternoon. You can stroll the pathways under shade trees, or sit in the snack bar area and enjoy a ginger beer. Or you can buy a fresh coconut from one of the vendors. Just remember, no cricket in the park, so leave those bats and balls at home. The next day we were up really early to catch the 6 a.m. train from Colombo to Polonnaruwa. This 6-hour train ride takes us north and east across the central area of the country. As always, the train is the best way to really see the country, and this trip was no exception. The train ticket, geared to the local economy, not the tourist economy, was about $4 per person in comparison to about $70 US to rent a car and driver for the same trip. One thing you will discover very quickly in Sri Lanka is that the tourist industry is relatively young and the country has not quite got it right in regards to pricing. Tourist sites are fairly expensive. Expect to pay around $25 per person for entry to any significant site. Hotels are also a little overpriced for what they offer. In the off-season, we suggest that you bargain for a 50% reduction in the rack rate. In regards to transportation, the country promotes the car and driver concept for tourists. While backpackers may feel comfortable on intercity buses, anyone with more luggage will likely end up renting a car and driver for anywhere between $50 and $70 US for a trip of a couple of hours. While everywhere in the world, tourists should expect to pay more than locals, in Sri Lanka the difference is more significant. However, if you expect this prior to your visit, you will be better able to accept it and enjoy all that the country has to offer. After arriving in Polonnaruwa and checking into the hotel, we decided to explore the town and surrounding area. The town of Polonnaruwa is basically one main street with a grocery store, a Buddhist temple, a few restaurants, and some shops. Located on the main highway, the town seems to exist to service the hotels in the area for the tourists who come to see the ancient ruins of the capital city a mile or so up the road. When traveling to Sri Lanka, you need to know that often restaurants are referred to as bakeries. I'm not sure why, but perhaps it's because of the many baked and fried items called short foods that are sold in these locations. Here you can see uldu vadai, the round fried donut-shaped foods, mutton and fish rolls, and meat, fish, and vegetarian rotis for sale. The city is located near a man-made lake, and you don't have to walk very far to find yourself in rural farmland and tropical forests. This is a great place for a stroll in the late afternoon or early morning to watch the birds, the fishermen on the lake, and in the evening to watch the sun set. The next morning we began our tour of the ruins of the ancient capital city of the Polonnaruwa Kingdom. The site of the ruins stretches out over a fairly large area, with some distance between some of the more popular and well-preserved sites. You can rent a bicycle from most hotels, but considering that Polonnaruwa is even hotter than Colombo, we decided to hire a tuk-tuk for the morning to drive us to and around the site. The ruins are truly impressive, and many of the statues of Buddha are the best we have seen outside of South Korea. These photos represent just a small sampling of the many structures and ruins on the site. Be aware, however, there are no facilities within the grounds, and if you leave to have lunch, you will need to pay again to get back in, so make sure you take lots of water and snacks with you for the day. Arriving back at our hotel, we found that a wedding party was underway. Before long, the party was in full force. I was invited to join the festivities, and despite the 47-degree temperatures, I found myself doing my best to keep up with my fellow dancers. Fortunately, any video of my efforts has not yet surfaced on YouTube. In addition to local weddings, Sri Lanka is also a very popular wedding and honeymoon destination for the people of southern India. In fact, the number of weddings we saw during our travels in Sri Lanka, both in hotels we stayed in and in the parks we visited, almost caused us to rename Sri Lanka the Wedding Island. The next day we packed our bags into a tuk-tuk and took off down the highway for the 38-kilometer trip to Dambulla, home of the Golden Cave Temple. Dambulla is a larger town than Polonnaruwa and much more affluent. In Dambulla you will find a wider choice of restaurants, a Western-style supermarket, and some really good silk and clothing stores. The main reason for visiting Dambulla, however, is the Golden Cave Temple, and that is reason enough. Although the large golden Buddha and stupa are impressive enough on their own, and the grounds of the temple and temple museum are well worth a look, the main attraction is the 5 caves at the top of the mountain. To reach the caves, you will need to climb up this staircase, and then a moderately steep pathway to the top. Along the way, you can stop and look out over the scenery, or purchase food, drinks, and souvenirs from several vendors strategically placed at rest points. Once you reach the top, take the time to enjoy the view while you catch your breath. Fortunately, there was a good breeze this day to cool us off while we climbed. I'll bet you the sheep found it a lot easier to get up here than we did. Once at the top, you will need to leave your shoes at the entry gate. We would suggest a good pair of socks for any visit to temples or Buddhist sites in Sri Lanka. Otherwise, the sand and stone can be very hot on your feet. There are over 80 known caves in the area, but the 5 caves on this site are the largest and best preserved. The shaded walkway leading to the entrance of each of the caves was built in 1938, but the caves themselves date back from the 3rd and 2nd century BC. The first cave is the smallest, and is dominated by a huge reclining Buddhist statue. It is difficult to get any pictures as the statue takes up almost the entire space. At the foot of the statue there is a shrine, and on the walls some very detailed and beautiful paintings. The next cave is the largest of the 5 and has the greatest variety of statues and paintings. In this cave there are long rows of Buddhist statues circling the outer wall of the cavern. In total there are 160 statues in the 5 caves. While most are images of Lord Buddha and Bodhisattvas, there are also statues and frescoes of the Hindu gods Vishnu and Ganesh. This UNESCO World Heritage Site is a must destination on any visit to Sri Lanka. Be sure to provide yourself with enough time for a visit to the temple, a leisurely climb, and lots of time at the top in the caves. The next morning we had arranged for a jeep and driver to take us on a day safari to the Minneriya National Park to see the elephants and bird life. The elephants in Sri Lanka roam freely between several national parks in the country depending on the season and where the water is. The guides who run the safaris have a cell phone network to inform them of not only which parks the elephants are in, but also where in the park they are located. We are glad we got an early start, because by the afternoon there are a lot of jeeps and minivans in the park all congregating on the elephant's location. In the morning we were pretty much the only ones there, and that gave us a sense of being alone in the forest and wetland areas. This was my first time seeing elephants in the wild, and I was impressed by the majesty and dignity of these creatures. In addition to elephants, we saw several interesting species of birds, wild turkeys, peacocks, and a strange deer with really big Mickey Mouse-style ears. This was truly one of the highlights of the trip, and I would highly recommend booking one of these safari outings while you are in Sri Lanka. The next day we hired a tuk-tuk and driver for the day and made our way north to the Minneriya Mountain. Minneriya Mountain is considered to be the location where Buddhism was first introduced to the country. To get to the temple at the top of the mountain requires a bit of a climb up these stairs. When you get to the top of these stairs, there are many more stairs to climb. As always, snacks and souvenirs are available along the way. The temple at the top of the mountain is quite large and well maintained. This is a popular pilgrimage site in July on the days of the full moon. On the way back, we stopped for fruit at a roadside store. Never pass up the opportunity to buy mangoes and king coconut when on the road in Sri Lanka. These are cool, refreshing, and healthy snacks for the journey. The next morning, we packed up and got back into a tuk-tuk to travel to our last destination in Sri Lanka, the city of Kandy in the central province, about 62 kilometers south of Dambulla. While in Dambulla, we had found a local tuk-tuk driver willing to do the run to Kandy. This guy was a huge Bob Marley fan. The back seat of the tuk-tuk had a big mural of Bob, and there were two huge speakers in the back blasting out reggae music. When planning this vacation, the last thing we expected was to be cruising down a road in Sri Lanka, listening to reggae music. Along the way we passed through the town of Matali, and he stopped to show us the local Hindu temple. The details of the carvings at this temple were amazing. We could have spent at least an hour exploring this and the town, but all too soon it was back in the tuk-tuk with Bob, and onwards to Kandy. Kandy is the second largest city in Sri Lanka, with a population of over 100,000 residents. The ride from Dambulla was through forest and past local communities which appeared to become more affluent as we approached the city. With the three of us and luggage in the tuk-tuk, there were times when we wondered if it was going to make it up the hills, but somehow we did. Located in the hills of the Kandy Plateau, Kandy is one of the most scenic cities in Sri Lanka and a popular tourist destination. In the town there are a number of excellent restaurants and no shortage of stores and marketplaces for shopping. In Kandy, you will need to be cautious of touts who appear to be working in a store, but in reality will lead you to another store to get a commission. Kandy is a buyer beware and bargain till you drop type of town. Try to get the best price possible after checking out the quality, but have fun doing it, and remember, the difference of $1 or $2 is not much to us, but means an awful lot to the locals, so get a good price, but make sure they make a living as well. There is a lot to see and do in and around the city of Kandy, so we were glad we had planned on staying for a few days. When we arrived at our hotel, there was a pre-wedding ceremony in progress outside the main doors. Both the bride and groom are led to the wedding area by a procession of dancers and drummers in this traditional Sri Lankan Sinhalese Buddhist ceremony called the Polonnaruwa wedding ceremony. We found out later that this hotel was a popular spot for weddings, and during our stay there was at least one wedding here each day and sometimes two, one in the morning and one in the afternoon in the central event hall within the hotel. Our first stop in Kandy was the Periodically Botanical Gardens beside the Mahawali River. These gardens are thought to have been initially developed in the 14th century by the royal family when Kandy was an independent kingdom. Today these gardens spread over 147 hectares and are home to over 4,000 species of plants, flowers, and trees from all the corners of the earth. We would suggest at least half a day, if not a full day, to roam around the gardens and explore the various exhibits and forested areas. If you get hungry or thirsty, there is a restaurant within the gardens and several covered gazebo-like structures where you can rest, catch some shade, or have a picnic lunch. The various trees and areas are well marked, and the map of the gardens makes it really easy to find your way along the pathways to the various areas. This is Palm Alley, one of the most famous areas in the gardens. One of the most interesting things we saw in the park were what we first thought were large birds, but on closer examination were actually thousands of huge bats flying overhead. They didn't bother us, and we did not bother them. The botanical gardens in Kandy are a must destination on any visit to this city. Kandy is also home to the Temple of the Tooth Relic, one of the most important Buddhist sites in the world. This temple was built to enshrine the tooth of Lord Buddha, retrieved from his funeral in India in 543 BC. The relic has a long and interesting history. Legend has it that whoever possesses the sacred tooth relic had a divine right to rule the land. As a result, many wars were fought for possession, and the relic changed hands and locations over the centuries. Locals and tourists alike line up for morning and evening prayers at the temple to view this ancient relic. The lineup is very long, and the inside of the main chamber can be extremely crowded during these times. The Temple of the Tooth itself is well worth a visit. There are many small chambers, each with interesting tapestries, paintings, and statues. The view of the grounds and the city from various points within the temple and outside are also worth exploring. One of the most interesting areas is a chamber at the back of the temple that appears to be designed in a style reminiscent of Thailand Buddhism. Also, the carvings and architecture of the back entrance are well worth a look. While you are there, be sure to visit the Buddhist Museum behind the temple. It is filled with displays of Buddhist art and history from around the world. Also on the temple grounds, there are some ancient ruins dating from the days when Kandy was an independent kingdom. These are also well worth exploring. In all, we would suggest at least 3 hours to visit this site. Kandy is also an excellent base for half-day or full-day trips to nearby temples and towns, or you can just hire a tuk-tuk and tour the countryside. In Sri Lanka, the destination is truly not as important as the journey, because once you get out of the city into the surrounding mountains, you have the opportunity to view the beauty of this country and to meet some of the local people. This makes any day trip memorable. On our last night, after packing for the train back to Colombo, we went to see the Sri Lankan traditional dance performance down by the river near the Temple of the Tooth. In addition to many traditional folk dances and a performance of the national anthem, the highlight of the evening is the fire dance. The fire dance begins with performers rubbing torches along their arms and bodies, eating fire, and then they bring in a bed of red-hot coals. Those in the first row can feel the heat of these coals on their feet and shins as they fan them to increase the temperature. The performers then walk barefoot on these coals. A word of caution: if you're sitting in the front row, watch out for sparks on your legs or clothing. The fire dance is a must-see on any trip to Kandy. The next day we headed to the railway station to catch the 3 p.m. train through the Kandy Hills back to Colombo. We booked the rear observation car for this 4-hour journey. There are 2 large observation windows at the back of the car, and if you can get these seats, you will have a panoramic view of the hills, forest, and towns throughout the trip. This is a vintage train, so be prepared for a bumpy ride. We were used to trains that sway from side to side, but this was the first time we were on a train that actually bumped up and down. That being said, the train ride from Kandy to Colombo is one of the most popular scenic routes in Sri Lanka. While traveling back to Colombo to catch our plane to Malaysia, we reflected on all the places we went and the things we saw and did while in Sri Lanka. We recalled the energy of Colombo, the capital city, the quiet of the ancient ruins of the kingdom of Polonnaruwa, the beautiful statues in the cave in Dambulla, and the various Hindu and Buddhist temples we visited throughout the country. We will never forget the majesty of the elephants in the Minneriya National Park, or the incredible variety of plants and trees in the Kandy Botanical Gardens. And of course, we will never forget the traditional fire dance in Kandy. We will always remember how spicy the food was: dal and fish curry for breakfast, short-eaten curries with rice for lunch, and kothu for dinner, all enjoyed with coconut milk, mango juice, ginger beer, or local beer to cool our palates. But most of all, we will remember the beauty of this island, the tropical forest, and the warmth and friendliness of the people. In the short time we were in Sri Lanka, we managed to see quite a bit, but there was so much that we did not have time to see and do. We did not have time to go north to visit Jaffna, or travel to the northeast coastal town of Trincomalee. We did not have time to travel to the beaches on the south coast or see the sunrise on Horton's Plains in the mountains south of Kandy. With so much more to see and do, we are sure to return to Sri Lanka one day to see more of the Teardrop Island.